and who wanted to search the scriptures, when they came together, they became a church. Whenever 2 or 3 are gathered together, Jesus said, "There am I amongst you." The notion of a covenant community was a new idea in the 16th and 17th century. It was still being explored, and it had many appealing aspects in that it brought together people who shared the same outlook on life, but it also had a kind of downsides in that it created new boundaries. The church became defined by the covenant in a way, and if you couldn't accept the covenant, you didn't belong. So for that reason, the Puritans are considered, or the Pilgrims in particular, the ones who settled in Plymouth, are considered separatists because they separated from the world to form their own community. But they didn't really separate from the world, they separated from the Church of England to form their own community. But the question of who was a member and who was not was to be a lively and much debated question ever after. The second thing I would say that we talked about last time was the notion that, or the description of the voyage of the Mayflower, and who these people were. They had separated, tried to separate out from the Church of England within England, found themselves persecuted, went to the Netherlands for a dozen years or so, weren't persecuted there, but were losing their Englishness and their culture and their special feeling about being together. And so they embarked on the voyage. And it was kind of a historical accident that A, they went, and B, they ended up where they did. At the time, English explorers had been exploring the North American continent and had declared certain parts of it as property in the king's name, and but they needed to find settlers. So that were these entrepreneurial businessmen who were looking to people the North American colonies, and they met the Pilgrims in the Netherlands who were looking for a new home. They came together and eventually landed at Plymouth, although that was off course from where they were supposed to land south of the Hudson River in what's now New Jersey, but were blown off course and ended up in Plymouth. We're going to talk a little bit later, and Hillary has a wonderful story, not wonderful in the sense of delightful, but wonderful in the sense of vivid, about what the privation was in those early days. I think the last lead in from last week to this, or the last session to this session, is the notion that we talked about at some length last time, was that the Pilgrims believed that there was yet more truth and life to come, and light to come from study of the Gospels, that all the answers hadn't been developed by a church hierarchy or by theologians. So they were skeptical not only of Roman Catholic theology, but also saw the limitations of Luther and the limitations of Calvin, and believed devoutly that if they studied the Bible together and learned its lessons, that they would learn new things that are useful to living in what to them was the modern world. That this search for this belief in that there's yet more truth and light to come, I think resonates with us in the whole UCC campaign of God is still speaking. We ourselves believe that our interactions with God can lead us, can be a useful guide, not a useful guide, the most useful guide to living in the modern world. Which brings us to the point, the topic today, which is that the Pilgrims were people of the book. And by that, they believed that the Bible itself was a foundational source of wisdom, that and the most superior source of wisdom there was. They had Bible commentaries that were written by Luther and Calvin and other people, but they wanted to engage with the text and believed that the text itself had a kind of authority that no other source of information had. And I think one of the things that's a little hard for us to recover about the period 400 years ago is how excited people were to read the Bible, but to have the Bible in their own language in front of them. That encouraged literacy, among other things, but it also gave them a chance to interact with kind of foundational wisdom without the mediation of priests. And what they tended to focus on, and while they read the whole Bible and loved the whole Bible, the group that we're talking about was particularly interested in the Acts of the Apostles and the Pauline epistles, the letters of Paul, because what they were discovering from a close reading of that material was that the church, the early church, didn't have many of the trappings that it come accreted onto the church over the centuries. They discovered that there were just two sacraments, or they believed that there were just two sacraments, baptism and communion, but the other 5 sacraments, they found no direct evidence for in the New Testament. They believed that the church hierarchy had been corrupted, that when you studied the Acts of the Apostles and the letters of Paul, you didn't find references to bishops and popes. You didn't find a hierarchy where, in a set of traditions where ministers or priests wore vestments, where music was elaborate, where art was elaborate. It was a simpler time, or a simpler conception of the church, and they tried to recover it. And in particular, in church offices, they had only 3 church offices. Rather than the hierarchy of bishop, archbishop, cardinal, pope, there was a really just at the congregational level, there were elders who were entitled to publicly preach and pray, and ruling elders who were kind of behind the scenes that ran the congregation and made sure that it played the Karen MacArthur role. And there were deacons that assisted the ruling elders in the administration of the congregation. So it was a group of people who were transplanted from one culture to another, were trying to use the Bible as their source of inspiration and guidance, and were covenanted together, but in a strange place and in strange times. And we're going to see the strange place and strange times more in the subsequent sessions that we have. But I think I'm going to wrap up there. And then, but Hillary, I mentioned a moment ago, had a story about the Mayflower Voyage I think is worth sharing before we break into groups. Hillary?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. One thing that that I keep thinking about this material is we learned some of this in school, whatever. But the Pilgrims have always seemed, well, those people hundreds of years ago, distant, they wore funny hats or whatever it is. But there's this story in the material here, if you read it, about William Bradford's wife, Dorothy May Bradford. She and William Bradford were married when she was 16 years old. Now, I just want you to think about that a minute. She was 16. He was 23. She ended up having a son. She had a baby around about the time when William Bradford and the rest of them decided they should leave Holland and go here to this strange place. So she was about 19 then. They decided, maybe he decided, I don't know who decided, they decided to leave their little boy, who was 3 years old, in Holland, because maybe it wouldn't be safe for him over here. So there she is. She had to leave her baby. Then she endured 66 days on the Mayflower. She got here. They anchored in the harbor in Provincetown. For 6 weeks, they were there on the ship while the men went off to see if they could find a place to build houses or whatever. At some point during that time, she drowned. She drowned. She was 23. The accounts are not clear about how it was that she went off the ship and drowned. I keep thinking about the recovery and therapy community who have the word HALT, H-A-L-T. Those letters stand for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. The food had begun to run out on the Mayflower. What god-awful food there had been on the Mayflower, who knows? So she must have been hungry. She might have been angry that the husband went off every day, leaving her, and that her baby was somewhere probably never to be seen again. She must certainly have been lonely, missing that little child, who, if you are a mother or a father here, you know how important the closeness of your young child is to you. What a comfort that child is to you. And she almost certainly was tired, because how did they sleep? So there are questions as to whether she slipped off the Mayflower deck. My husband, when I was discussing this with him, pointed out, well, it was December. Maybe the deck was icy and slippery, and maybe she could have slipped over. Questions whether she slipped by accident or whether it was not an accident. I can tell you, as a veteran of about 30 cruises, that it's damned hard to fall off a ship. It just is. So I don't know. Nobody knows what happened to Dorothy. But it is a terrible, terrible story about this very young woman, bereft of her child, come to this godforsaken place, not knowing what's going to happen to her. And meantime, the husband is off leading things. So I keep thinking about her. There is I believe her body may or may not have ever been found. I can't remember, but there is a gravestone in Provincetown, a memorial to her. She's just one person that was on the Mayflower, but I just want you to think about her a little bit, and may she rest in peace. All right. So we have 2 questions for you. The first question, now listen carefully, because last time you said, oh, I didn't remember the question. So listen, okay? So the Pilgrims, as Dave has told you, believed that each individual person's spiritual journey was in God's hands and would be revealed through time. But they also believed that being part of a communion or a congregation of fellow believers could assist a person along the journey. Now turn to us here at First Church. In what ways, this is the question, in what ways do you believe that God is still speaking to us and to our congregation? In what ways do you believe that God is still speaking to us and to our congregation? And a second question, as we construct our views of our Christian identity, how do we consider the role of those whose views differ from ours? How do you articulate what you believe without assailing those who don't believe in the same way? So how do you view the other, the outsider, if you think of an outsider, as you think about yourself as a Christian? Questions about the questions? All right, now we're going to have about 20 minutes to discuss, and I'm going to try to do the, oh God.
Hillary, I typed
Help.
the questions. I typed the questions that
Yes,
you
I
put in
saw.
the chat. So
I saw, but I'm
anyone-
looking for.
if anyone
Help.
wants to copy and paste those so that they have them. they're in-
Okay,
Where are they?
I think they do, the
they're
chat
in
will
the,
remain there.
they're in the chat.
Oh, okay.
They're in the chat.
I'll
And
copy
I'm
them.
looking for, I'm looking for putting you into breakout groups and I can't find it. Lexi, would you put us into breakout groups?
Sure.
Thank you.
Um,
Maybe about 4 people in each one, something like that.
sorry, Hillary, for some reason,
Whoops.
I don't have an option for that.
Oh my goodness. All right, so we're up the creek without a paddle.
Well,
Somebody must be the host.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So sorry. I think I know what happened, but you know how this is. We're all learning this stuff.
it says
Okay,
that,
so Karen's gonna do us.
No, I just said somebody must be the host.
it
So
says that
Okay.
I'm the host, but I don't see, oh, here it is. Okay. We've switched, we've got it.
Okay,
Hillary, how many people do you want on each breakout?
I think about 4. Here's Arthur. About 4. Yeah, 4 is good.
4 or 5.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Lexi.
Hillary,
No worries.
Yes.
how do we know which question each group has?
Make
They
your
can
choice. Make your choice.
Okay.
They're in the chat. If you look in the chat, the questions are in the chat.
Hillary, how long do you want us to stay in rooms?
About maybe 18 minutes.
Okay.
You are now in the main
There's
session.
Dave. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Perry. Hello, Susie.
Hello, Dave. We're coming back. People are coming back.
I read a book called One Small Candle about
Yeah.
40 years ago. And do you have it?
No, there's a new one
Oh, really?
There is.
with that title called One Small Candle.
Look at that.
I find,
That's the title comes from Bradford's of Plymouth plantation. Bradford was not the first, but the second longest serving governor of Plymouth colony.
Uh-huh.
And he had
Want me to do that?
a statement that a little bit like the city on the hill or don't hide your light under a bushel, that if one small candle can light 1,000 other candles.
Uh-huh.
It's
Oh.
a combination of spirit and
So
truth.
It's
is
kind of
that,
hairy, isn't it?
does that One Small Candle book reflect the first year of the Pilgrims' time in this country?
Yes, it's the larger story of that.
Uh-huh.
You should get
It's
it.
brand new. It came out in 2020. It's by Francis Bremer, who was he's also a director of the Congregational Library, but he's a well-known historian of Puritanism. He wrote the most authoritative biography of John Winthrop a few years ago.
Well, we'll call Harvard Bookstore as soon as this is over.
There you go.
Yeah, good. Well, so we certainly had a wonderful discussion in our group. Would somebody like to just volunteer to give 1 or 2 highlights from your group's discussion? You know, we've only got a few minutes. You know how these things are, but who would like to speak up about what they discussed?
Well, in our session, we talked about the first question having to do with our sharing our faith with other people, especially within our community. And I referenced our men's breakfast yesterday, which was quite, as usual, quite moving and quite, we were able to get close to people and understand their thinking in a very unself-conscious way about our faith and about our philosophy of life. It was pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds almost, Perry, as if you're saying something that we heard a little bit in our group if I can try to put it this way, God is speaking through us. So when we have discussions with each other, we learn from each other. We learn new ways of thinking about our faith and about God.
Mhm.
Is that sort of like what you're saying?
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The thing that strikes me, though, is that the conversations we have with other members of our church are different from the conversations we have with our next door neighbor or our friends for lunch or whatever. It's at a different level
Mhm,
when we're talking to a person of faith.
mhm.
Mhm.
Thank you, Perry. Who else would like to offer what might have been discussed? I'm not going to pick on you, Bruce.
Too
Bruce
late.
complained that I picked on him.
Too late.
You're not going to tell me what groceries to buy.
Yeah. No.
Like I do.
Marion, would you mind sharing what you were saying about the natural world in our group? This was very interesting.
Well, I love history, and so it's one of the lenses through which I look at things. And as I look at the stories that we hear and what we know about the Pilgrims and when they came, as you were talking earlier this morning, you were talking about being on a cruise ship and it would be hard to fall off. I don't think it would be hard to fall off a 16th century boat if the deck was icy. So and so that was something that my response was, well, gee, if that were high enough priority, I would try to find out something about it. But when you're doing first person interpretation as museum educational work, one of the things that you learn is to try to look at the world through the eyes of the people who you are trying to learn about and pass on that learning. And I use that all the time. As I sit in my house, my relationship with the world is different from when I'm out in the garden, because there's a continuum in nature, and that's a gift from God. It's something that our forebears experienced. I mean, I planted tomatoes, they planted what they wanted to plant, but we're all created in the image of God, and that was true then, and that's true now. And what's the connection between the two, and how can that enlighten us as we move forward and try to deal with the other in whatever form.
Thank you, Marion. Who else would like to say something here?
In my group, we talked about the value of being in a group like Daughters of Abraham, which opened Linda up to the values. Let's see. I don't know how to put that part, but anyway, opened up to the basics, or the I'm stumbling on that, but
That's
anyway,
good.
it opened her up to what others believed, and a more respect for other streams of who God is and what God wanted of us.
Mhm.
And then we talked about, let me see, I wrote it down. I scribbled, so I can't read my own writing. Oh, I contributed, as I always do, or often do, the discovering the hopelessness of discussing values with my brother when he and I discovered that we had different values. And if you don't have that basic commonality of what is good and what is bad, there's no point in arguing anymore. And so, you know, Jesus somewhere in the Bible says, shake the dust off your feet and move on. And then Dave Kidder suggested that diversity, he's picked up the value of diversity, accepting diversity and working toward diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And then I contributed the idea of just the subject of homosexuality, how back in the day, thousands of years ago, homosexuality was bad, 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 bad. And now through the ages and more recently in our generation, there's openness. I mean, my goodness, we have deacons and senior minister and important members of our congregation whom we know and love and adore and whatever. I mean, God is still speaking. And so I'd rather move forward with people who agree, you know, let's get things done. I think Jesus wanted us to do things. Get, you know, open up, people. That's what Jesus was all about himself.
That's interesting, because that makes me think about this idea of God is still speaking. In other words, it's not set in stone. You know what and this will lead us to next week when we talk about they were colonists, they were colonizers. Remember, folks, these guys did not live in the 21st century. They believed that they could move forward in their understanding of their faith, and they did continue to move forward in their understanding of their faith. And so have we, just what Pauline is saying, you know, attitudes, beliefs, acceptance has all moved through time. And so even though we know these folks back there, all those many 400 years ago, exactly 400 years ago, practically right now, had attitudes toward, let's say, the Native Americans or toward people who were different from them. That was the way they felt then. We feel differently now, and thank you, God, for it. You know, God is still speaking. We need to listen. All right, we need to read, learn, and inwardly digest, right? Well, so we need to finish. This has been wonderful. I hope that in your group you heard some things that may have been revelatory to you. I thank you so much for your participation, and thank you, Dave, for so adroitly teaching us so much in a short period of time. Thank you, Lexi, for rescuing me. I'll learn at some point. Thank each of you for your otherness and your togetherness.
Cute.
Everybody on this screen
Nicely done.
thinks
Amen.
a little bit differently, but we are
Amen.
all here together. I had somebody, I forget who in my group, that talked about the clouds of witnesses in our building. And the person said that may be kind of idolatrous to think about our building. But on the other hand, here we are gathered here. So we're together, though we are apart. So blessings on all of you. I hope the rest of your day is good. And next week, we will talk about the Pilgrims as colonists and colonizers. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.
Good.
Thank you, Dave and Hillary.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Take care.
See you shortly.